Hi, this is Curt Robbins from Higher Learning LV in Las Vegas, and welcome to Curt's Cannabis Corner. This week, we're discussing a very interesting market study that's just been released, and we're fortunate enough to have the authors of that study in the room. Also, I'm joined by my co-host, David Rheins from the Marijuana Business Association in beautiful Seattle, Washington. Welcome, Dave.
Thank you for having me. It is beautiful here today, and I'm looking forward to a robust discussion.
They have authored a study that took 38 different Delta-8 products. Now, we've talked about Delta-8 on this podcast before, so this is very interesting because now we're getting to where the rubber meets the road, and that's a space where Mr. David Rheins especially thrives. So what do you think about this study, Mr. Rheins?
It touches on a couple of issues. The first is these synthetic cannabinoids and how they're playing in the marketplace and their unregulated status. And the larger issue, which is standards. And so we're fighting that market by market and state by state, while the feds and the FDA sort of play footsie in the sidelines and are starting to take it more seriously as Congress is addressing legalization in a more serious fashion these days.
Right.
So this is a great discussion because Delta-8 is, as we just discussed, it's Delta-9 for those who don't have legal markets for the most part.
And we should tell viewers, give them a little summary here. Delta-8 is what's called a molecular isomer. It means it is extremely similar to Delta-9 THC, which is the infamous psychoactive cannabinoid from this plant. And it is typically, for commercial processing, derived from CBD from hemp, typically, not always.
Right.
Gleb, let's tell us more about this very pioneering study.
Yeah, so basically we sent the products in. We had the lab technicians test them to see what's in them. And then we compared the results to what it says on the label or the product description. And as we found, most of the products did not contain as much Delta-8 as they were claimed to be. And they also had illegal Delta-9 THC levels.
In fact, your study said 53%.
That's right. More than half of the products were essentially illegal.
That's a big deal when, this comes down to legality, right?
Right. I mean, it's kind of ironic because the whole point of these products is that it's a legal alternative to Delta-9 THC.
And commercially, those folks who do go through the process of becoming a legal cannabis player have a lot more rigorous protocols. Can you drill down on where those, you said 38 samples, where geographically they came from?
Most of the products either came from physical stores within the United States or they were bought from online brands, but they all came from the United States.
What is your perspective on Delta-9 versus Delta-8?
I'm a nurse practitioner in California, and so I work with patients who want to use cannabis as a treatment. And most of my patients are older adults, so they're very concerned about the euphoric effects of Delta-9, and Delta-8 is being presented to them right now as having less psychoactivity, less euphoria.
Roughly
and I don't know,
right?
Yeah, you hear reports from a half to 2/3. And I don't think that the research really supports clinical implications yet for Delta-8. So, from the healthcare consumer perspective, they're, being marketed to and consuming a product that, I do think is relatively safe. This report highlights how there can be larger levels of Delta-9 in there again. So they're going to consume a product that's going to have reactions they don't expect.
Yeah, when I saw the 53%, I thought, wow, there are some consumers being misled across the United States.
Yeah. The reason why is because, as I'm sure you're aware, that the process that they use to make Delta-8 from CBD, it actually creates a lot of Delta-9 as a byproduct. So if you don't remove it after you do that, then it's going to stay in the product and it's essentially going to be illegal just because of that.
That's very interesting. So, Gleb, I'm assuming that some companies want to enhance profits, cut corners, and they simply, it looks like they're just avoiding that step, perhaps.
Exactly. Yeah.
We know testing is expensive, so they're cutting corners there too.
Exactly. Your study reports that 68% of the samples tested don't have the stated amount of Delta-8, and the product's all about Delta-8.
That's right.
In the production and manufacturing of these products, is there the proper protocol? Are those processors employing testing as part of that? and who's doing it and who's certifying those labs and against what standards. And then number two is what's appearing on these labels, what's required by the state to be on these labels, and what are consumers looking for on these labels. There seems to be no standard in terms of what's mandated, and then no enforcement even if there is a standard.
Absolutely.
Eloise, from a nurse perspective, if a patient purchases a product that they perceive to be Delta-8 and they get a bunch of Delta-9 in there, what are some of the implications potentially of that?
Yeah, it really depends on the end user and their experience. We're definitely seeing increased reports through poison control on Delta-8 products where they're reporting confusion, anxiety, increased heart rate, vomiting. And the question really is it a Delta-8, Delta-9 combination? Is it a high level of Delta-9? Again, I think, David brings up such a good point that we don't have standardization for testing. Every state seems to have set their own levels. We've heard reports of some laboratories working with companies to produce the levels that the companies are working for. And I think with Delta-8 and the way that it's processed right now, the biggest concern I have as a healthcare professional is the residual solvents that can be in this product. We're not really testing for these residual solvents. And just because it's not showing up doesn't mean it's not there. I mean, we saw this with the vape crisis, right? People would say, oh, we don't have vitamin E acetate. Well, did you test for it? No, we didn't test for it. So how can you say it doesn't exist? So,
well, what can we do as an industry to create those lab standards, to create those safe protocols, to have a customer focused approach to bringing these products to market? In all these markets, Oregon, Washington, are making now Delta-8, Delta-10 illegal for that very reason.
The thing I always come back to is education. There's a lack of education, for consumers. And I think holding some of these companies and brands accountable, as a healthcare professional, that's part of my advocacy work, is to work with these brands to say, look, this isn't a safe product, or, that transparency. And Leafreport is doing such a great job of, these market surveys and this transparency to educate the end consumer to say, look, I mean, the last I heard, there's over 3,000 CBD brands on the market, and many of them are starting to put in Delta-8. So, let's really take a look at these brands and look at their lab testing, and are they meeting, vetting them? Are they meeting certain standards? A lot of the work at Leafreport that I think really can help the consumer narrow down their research and their time and energy into trying to find a good brand and a good product that will be safe and effective.
Did you guys uncover any brands or producers who were particularly good?
A couple of the products were fairly good, but I would say, like, as a general trend overall, the results were not that great.
Well, I noticed that you folks did a grading system, which I really liked. It's a very intuitive summary, and you did A, B, C, F, and 32% of these 38 products received an A, while an equal 32% of the 38 products received a failing grade of an F.
Yeah, that's right. So the products that got an A were essentially within 10% of the cannabinoid level, and that's kind of like the level that experts say you should expect from a cannabinoid product. Obviously, the cannabinoid levels vary from batch to batch, so you also have to keep that in mind, and we're only testing them once. So that's why the results are just a really good overview of what you can expect from Delta-8 products.
What labs did you guys use?
Cannabis Laboratories. It's a cannabis third-party testing lab from Las Vegas.
Both the summarization of the report to the common consumer, to the layperson, is very good in this. We don't get that in all these studies. A lot of times there's a lot of scientific and technical speak and medical jargon, and the average patient or consumer cannot understand it. So that's one thing I like about this report a great deal. What was most surprising? Obviously, you went into this survey and project with preconceived notions. What most surprised you from your results?
For me, actually, the most surprising result was not the Delta-9 THC levels, but the fact that about a third of the products didn't even really clearly state how much Delta-8 should be in the product. And that's like a red flag right away.
For me, it was the Delta-9. I mean, these are, I guess it's surprising, but not surprising. One as high as, 15% THC is significant.
That's better than some of the weed I buy.
Right.
Especially Especially if the person hasn't used Delta-9 THC before and they
Right.
buy a product thinking it's Delta-8 and it has 15%, like they're probably going to have a negative reaction to that. Besides, there wasn't really any correlation between price and quality.
You can get a bottle for $20 and you can get a bottle for $120.
You're likely to get a better quality product if you're buying it from an online brand versus a store, just because you can check the third-party test results, you can find some information about the company. But if you're buying it from a physical store, you don't have any of that.
That a lot of the brick and mortar stores didn't necessarily have a website associated with their products either. So I think it's incredibly hard with so many products and companies on the market for these regulators to keep up. And I also think, again, it comes down to education because the regulators are uneducated as well. We have about 11 states that have banned it. Like you said, as it gets competitive, we're going to see these companies who are just trying to differentiate themselves. And it doesn't necessarily mean it's healthy and safe for the consumer. Particularly, I think about the buds and flowers or pre-rolls of Delta-8 that you can purchase online and that are likely just being sprayed with a Delta-8 distillate.
That's exactly what's going on.
And that's frightening to me. Consumer use and availability is outpacing the research and regulation.
Actually, the products that tended to perform the worst on the report were Delta-8 pre-rolls that were essentially hemp flower that was sprayed with Delta-8.
Wow.
Right. There was an overproduction of hemp. A lot of folks didn't know what to do with it. And so, yeah, the pre-roll market and the synthetic terpenoids is a great way to create saleable product. And so, whereas we are overregulated in the legal cannabis industry, and overtaxed, overregulated at every step, and yet still can't come up with lab standards or labeling protocols, despite everybody seeming to want that.
Yeah, and it feeds into the whole stigma and the anti-cannabis crusaders who really want to demonstrate the harm or the risk of cannabis. And it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. You know, the prohibition and the lack of standardization and legalization creates a lot of their arguments. And I don't think people appreciate how difficult it is in this industry because everything is federally illegal, and that stigma that's so deep really makes it difficult for the right, enough people to be involved. I mean, we see that in healthcare, right? Where there's a very small number of us who are intimately involved in helping patients. We're like unicorns.
People definitely treat marijuana and CBD differently, marijuana and hemp. So if you're talking about hemp these days, people are a lot more educated about it. They know that it's not psychoactive. If you were asking people 5 years ago, what is CBD? Is it intoxicating? They wouldn't know, but these days it's pretty much common knowledge. But if you are, reporting on cannabis and marijuana, there's definitely still that stigma remaining.
The number one question I get when I do a presentation is, did you bring any samples? And I'm like, yes, I have some suppositories. Would you like to try them?
Good for you. Good for you.
Excellent response.
In practice, I've used Delta-8 for chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting because we have some of Mishulam's research there to support it. I do see clinical relevance there. It does help. I mean, not all the time, and most of those patients anecdotally report that they don't have a lot of psychoactive euphoric effects compared to Delta-9.
That dovetails right into my next question to you, Eloise. Was you mentioned earlier 11 states now have prohibited or banned Delta-8 THC. What are some of the implications from a patient and caregiver perspective? It seems like they might be rushing to that conclusion when we don't even have the research yet.
Yeah, it comes down to safe access again, because the truth is our patients and consumers are using it. They're going to try to find it. So they're not going to have safe access. And that's the thing that's concerning to me. And right. Even again, in this unregulated market, I'm not convinced that they have safe access at this point either. And right. We have to be mindful of the fact that, they're trying to sell us something. There's a lot of misinformation out there.
And in the CBD arena, a lot of these articles are essentially affiliate marketing, right? So the publishers are publishing it so that they'll get a shtup on the click through.
Because I think there's a lot of lack of loyalty, brands, people jump around, whatever's cheapest, easily accessible. Often the reason people don't get results is because they're not hitting the right dose. And again, it comes back to education for me. Looking for brands that are dedicated to educating the consumer and meeting certain criteria.
And it sounds like there's not a lot of trust right now. And with reports like you're releasing, I can understand why consumers and patients don't trust. This is quite frightening, actually.
A lot of people aren't even aware of what third-party testing is, or even if they were to look at a third-party test report, they wouldn't, fully understand what it means. And that's part of the education realm of this. And that's why it's so important to educate people about what they're buying and what third-party testing is and all of these factors. The one big thing that we have noticed is that over the years, third-party testing has improved really, really a lot for CBD products. And when you look at Delta-8, it's sort of where CBD was like 5 years ago, because for a lot of these products, there's no potency tests, there's no contaminant tests, and that's where CBD was 5 years ago. But if you look at CBD now, most serious brands have complete testing. You can check the results, they're up to date. It's a lot better than it used to be.
That's right. Yeah. And because of that demand. So if I'm a consumer and I'm watching this podcast and I want to find good sources of Delta-8, what would your advice be?
Definitely the first thing, third-party testing. You want full potency testing, full contaminant testing, heavy metals, residual solvents, pesticides, mold, you name it, everything, because you have to know what's in there.
Yeah, start with that report too, because at least you can see some, it's the transparency around the grading system and how those grades were determined.
Consumers need to get used to looking at certificates of analysis, pointing their phone at that QR code on the bottle. I really appreciate the vendors and companies who include a COA, obviously, but then don't make it difficult to reach and access, right? Just let me point my phone and click, and I'm there.
Yeah, that's a very good point. A lot of brands, like, they almost try to hide the test results. So you have to like find some obscure page where they're located, whereas other brands just put it exactly on the product page. You can click on it, you can scan it. It's very easy.
It's interesting how there's an evident separation between ethical professional companies who are trying to build consumer and patient trust and those who don't appear to be focused on that at all.
Right.
And making sure those COAs are up to date, at least within the last year, is also quite important.
Those things, again, are things we see through traditional FDA channels and we would expect to see in a legal product.
Right.
So I can tell you what happens is you've got a warehouse or a barn full of flour that you haven't been able to sell because the market is so depressed. And so you either blast it into oil, there's your distillates for you, and you augment it with whatever synthetics you need to make this shit palatable. Or two, you roll it into pre-rolls and spray it and treat it and bundle it up and hope nobody knows the difference. And again, in these markets where you don't have access to premium product, you're grateful to have access to anything, right? So even weak, contaminated, mislabeled product is better than no medicine at all.
We shouldn't have to feel like we're going into some dark alley to complete a transaction, right?
Yeah, well, that's like the biggest selling point of Delta-8, right? Is that it's a legal alternative in states where marijuana is illegal. Right. Yeah, especially the association between hemp and Delta-8, because as more people learn that Delta-8 is actually made from hemp, they might start to think, wait a second, so hemp is psychoactive after all. I thought it was not intoxicating.
But as you said, Eloise, it comes down to education, and it's not an easy challenge to educate an entire industry. As Gleb was saying, both the regulators and the producers and the distributors and the marketers, they all have to be in on the knowledge game.
So Eloise Theisen, you can find me at radicalhealthcare.com, RADICLE, healthcare.com. I'm also with leaf411.org. That is a free cannabis nurse hotline. So we have been doing a lot of education with consumers right now around Delta-8. And of course, with Leafreport, I'm the medical reviewer for the work that Gleb and other writers there do. And just really happy to be a part of something that provides transparency and education for consumers.
Yeah, so my name is Gleb Oleinik. I'm a freelance writer from Vancouver, Canada. You can find me at gleboleynik.com. And I also contribute to a lot of the reports and articles for Leafreport.
And Mr. David Rheins, how do you wrap your opinion of this whole thing?
I appreciate what Eloise and Gleb have done in this study and the effort to raise awareness about the quality of the products that are available to the consumer and the needs for standardization around testing protocols, around labeling protocols and packaging protocols, and most importantly, education for the grower, for the processor, and for the end consumer.
Well, I'd like to thank my guest this week, Eloise Theisen, and Gleb Oleinik from Vancouver, Canada, for sharing their very pioneering Delta-8 study, because there's some frightening statistics out there in the marketplace that we all, as industry professionals, need to pay attention to. We'll see you next week.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.
Cheers.